Welcome, everyone. Today is the 23rd of February 2023. Prometheus Dev Summit number 2 for this year. Yeah, let's get started. Before we get started, I have one point of order, and Julian has another. Should we migrate the voting system to the thing? You can see it if you scroll up in the meeting document a little bit. There's like 2 pluses. Well, it's only 1 plus anymore. Over or next to sections. And this is built into Google Docs now. The advantage is it's built in and it's nice. The disadvantage is it moves up and down depending on how many comments we have. I know my own gut, but what does everyone think beyond we should only be using 1? No strong opinions? Okay. I think we should keep using the old system because it makes it really hard to see at a glance which is in what at what level, because things keep moving around as people write and delete comments. Okay. Then we have one from Julian. KubeCon status of Dev Summit booth observability day. Observability day, the CFP rating or the program committee voting or whatever ended yesterday, European time. I don't know by heart when we release stuff. Bartek might know.
There was some deadline of like 28th. I can double check. So for our kind of like event chair decisions.
I thought so as well, but I actually make a statement. But I think that it also stands to reason because it was like just 1 week after the voting ended.
Yeah, so that's a draft. That's a draft of schedule. Deadline of the draft of the schedule, end of February.
Dev Summit, you mean during KubeCon? We don't have a room or anything as far as I'm aware.
So yeah, but do we plan to do one or do we abandon that idea?
If we have enough people on site, I would just do one. Push comes to shove, we just rent out some hotel room or some meeting space or whatever, and either ask CNCF if they can pay for it, or Grafana Labs does it, or whatever.
They can try to book like Google Office if there's one.
Yeah, that sounds good. There should be one.
Take this as an action item.
We should probably time box the discussion because this is at some point too much for like everyone having good food. Good point. So yeah, let's shove this on Bartek. Okay. We have Sam Jewell in here, and also it's not completely a mistake or accident because the topic of Björn and Sam is currently highest rated, so I'm going to move this down into the agenda. Unless there's anything else which we needed to cover for the previous booth. I think we have part-time booth something.
Okay, but there is no more news than what was in the team meeting list then.
Okay, Björn, Sam, do you want to hit it off?
Yeah, okay. I mean, that maybe it's already kind of done. Ironically, Sam's original use case got solved by another workaround, but that doesn't solve the general thing. So we remove the name of a metric. I mean, we essentially have a list in the PromQL engine which operations or transactions is the wrong word, right? Which operators and or functions remove the name because their result isn't well represented by the name, and it would be confusing if you still see the name. It's a rate, but you don't see it in the name. That works fine as long as you are not doing hacky stuff with the underscore the name underscore trick. So you can select metrics of different names into the same vector. And when you apply an operation on it that removes the name, then you may get collisions, and then you get this very infamous error message: vector cannot contain metrics with the same label set. Then, of course, the workaround is to first relabel the name label, pseudo label, into another label, which usually works unless you want to do like arrayed. What was it? The use case, like essentially the relabeling itself is an operation. Then you cannot take a range selector on it, and you cannot relabel a range selector. So either way would actually solve the problem if you could relabel and it's not like an operation in the classical sense. So you could still take a range selector on it, or you could relabel a range selector result. But yeah, this happens if you can only relabel essentially after you've applied the rate, then it's too late. Yeah, so there were a bunch of ideas how you can also approach this. You could like synthesize a new name that makes sense, like rate of something, but that's a very deep rabbit hole to go into because we have so many operations. But you could also, and this is kind of the least invasive approach, you could just not remove the name, but mark it as to be removed before we show this to the user. And then you could still relabel the name label later if you want to, or maybe you even have an operation that reduces the ambiguity further down, right? And only as the last step, you remove all the names that have been kind of tainted as this name doesn't make sense anymore, please remove it. There's also a very straightforward idea, which is what Victoria Metrics does. You just provide an option, keep the labels even if they don't make sense, which is pragmatic, but I think it kind of ignores the problem why we have removed the names in the first place, and it adds yet another configuration toggle to confuse the users. And I don't like this because it's a niche in a niche, essentially. Like the niche is that you use underscore underscore name underscore underscore at all. And then the niche in that niche is you use it in a way to create a name collision. And I don't want to like provide overhead to every single user by adding another toggle to a query where everyone is like scratching their heads what this is for. Yeah, so and in this linked issue, I think we have done a bunch of discussion here. So I think my take so far was, when we didn't discuss this yet at the Dev Summit for a while, we just do this least invasive thing and remove the name later, because that doesn't change anything, but it enables a few things. And it's arguably an overhead to track this like tag that the name has to be removed. But on the other hand, you don't need to remove the name on the fly. So in the end, it might actually be even more efficient depending on the query. So that was the least invasive thing, I think. So renaming, like creating, synthesizing proper names, new names is probably too hard. And I don't know what other options we are left with. Anyway, if you have any opinions about this, or this is all not going to work, that's why we are here to collect.
So for the one idea you mentioned where it's temporarily tracked, that would be in kind of another underscored meta label, or what were you thinking?
Yeah,
like
so
old
I think
underscore old metric or so?
Implementation wise, this would be, I think, the easiest to just still remove the underscore underscore name underscore underscore label and just move it into something named to be removed. But that makes it more complicated to relabel, because now you have to know that other magic label. It might also lead to, theoretically, to name collisions again if you have that label already. So I mean, it might be the way to go, but
it
the
would
other
also
idea I had
break PromQL in some ways, like if you do a count of a grouping and now there's this new label in there that wasn't there. But I guess before that, the query would have failed if...
Yeah. No, but so
Um,
the idea I thought we should do is we just like add another whatever bool into the whatever that struct is that is getting passed around, and to mark it kind of internally in the Prometheus engine, and just keep the underscore name label until we remove it in the end. Maybe that changes some queries. I'm not sure. Needs some analysis, I guess.
So without going too far in the implementation, I think this should be a detail, and the user should not be able to relabel the name in such a query. The question is, in most of the cases where this is used, this can still generate double metrics at the end. Like when I hit that error, it was because the node exporter changes some metric names, and I wanted in one query to do the rate of both of them, but we will still have twice the same metric set in the output, so we should still error in those cases. And
yeah, so
appropriate
that's why you should still be able to access the underscore name underscore label, so you can relabel it if you want to resolve the ambiguity. Right?
But you cannot do that with a range vector.
I mean, if the name label stays around, you could do it before the result is returned to the user. Right? I mean, you could just say,
okay, yeah,
rate of that metric normally, and just wrap everything into a relabel that extracts the underscore name before it gets removed, because that's then happening in the very last step.
And one totally different possibility would be to allow label replace to work on range vectors, but for that we would need to support variable typed functions.
Exactly, and we had similar queries like this. I think Julian had an issue open that was just updated. It's like years old, where somebody asked for filtering, like greater than filtering for range selectors, which would be weirdly a similar thing that we need to allow kind of I mean, for operators, we do that anyway, right?
Yeah, for that we do it. Just for functions, the whole way we manage the signatures is, this is the type of the first one, this is the type of the second one, so we would have to
yeah, it would be and this is why this would be way more invasive, because you change a fundamental of the language.
Yeah,
I think the type is not what would be difficult. What is difficult is that the function would return a vector with your original timestamps and not align the timestamp of the range vector.
I mean, that's yet another idea, but I think we didn't touch that one, right? Which is, I think, again, orthogonal, right? Showed a function that doesn't aggregate anything, actually change the timestamp, but I think that's a Prometheus 3 topic, and it doesn't help us here.
No, but I mean, we don't have any function that returns a range vector at the moment. It's more the return type that is difficult. The input, I don't think it will be difficult to implement, but the return type being a vector is something that's really new.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I would suggest to try, I mean, think through this, keep the underscore name underscore label, and just internally, not without marking it as a real label, just internally track it in the Prometheus engine and remove it as the last step. But maybe that breaks some queries. And that's why you should all think about it.
Okay. So to me, it's reasonable to do a test and rename that to underscore original name, something like that, and see what's going out of that.
I mean, the grouping is a problem, right? If the underscore name underscore label is, I just call it name label from now on, is treated specially, right? Because it doesn't block label matching and stuff like that. And if we add a new label, it needed to have the same properties. So maybe just keeping it would actually not break things.
It only... That's a good question, because you can also explicitly decide to keep the name in some of the group operators. So
yeah, it could actually break things if you just keep that and only remove it in the end.
Yeah, the question is, for the main issue is when you will use the without stuff, what will you do then? If you do some without and you have a bunch of labels, then it would keep that original name and you would have one series for each in the output.
Yeah, so if we did this, I mean, that would change the behavior, right? If we didn't remove it in the end.
Well,
I
we
mean-
would need to remove it before the aggregation even.
I mean, this is
So
the
if you-
idea, right? If in the end you sum up everything anyway, you resolve the ambiguity in the name, and then it's particularly annoying that you get this error message, although you're resolving the ambiguity further down. And that query wouldn't work right now, but if we just kept this, I'm just going the name label, and then
No,
in aggregation it disappears, of course, right?
Yes, that's the issue. If you do a sum without instance of the up matrix, for example, then you would have the hidden label that you would need to do something about, but it is not in the without clause. So what do you do with it?
I mean, if we don't introduce a new label, we just keep the name label. It's the same behavior as it is now, because the up metric has a name label, and then you sum it up, and the name label disappears, right? So if we, I mean, I haven't thought through all of this as said, but my gut feeling is it should just work, because the name label has this special role already to not break label magic and stuff like that. And maybe it's enough to keep this thought in mind, and then everyone who is into this stuff thinks about a few queries that might break or not break, and then we can discuss this on the issue. Yeah, I mean, Julius and Julian and Brian, I think you're already thinking about this, and I think you're precisely the right people to think about this. So maybe we can come up with a conclusion, not right now, but after a while, if this is working or not.
But I
Okay.
mean, if I just have a query like sum by underscored name of a rate of foo, then it would return a different result with this change. Like if I just drop that in here in chat, right? Because now you would get the rate per metric or the sum per metric name, and before that you would get the total sum because that label didn't exist anymore. Doesn't seem
Yes.
that.
But if you, I mean, the question is if the result would be different for a query that would even work before, right?
Yeah, but in this case, it would have worked before because, but in this case, you would just the sum would be like, oh well, the name label doesn't exist, so I'm just going to sum over everything and return you one time series.
But if there is like different names in the rate, it would already.
If the output of the rates would be like would contain duplicate series, that would already be an error.
Okay, but if there are other labels to distinguish them, and
yeah,
then you
can have like 10 different paths, but no metric name anymore. And before that, well, yeah, and maybe 2 different metric names still, but they don't have overlapping paths, so they wouldn't conflict.
Yeah.
And now you get a different result, and so that would break things.
Too bad. So
yeah.
if we want to do this, we need a feature flag then.
Yeah, or I mean, returning a range vector from a function would be a first. Currently, we have 2 ways of creating range vectors, either with subqueries or with a range vector selector. But there's nothing in PromQL that says that we should never return a range vector from a function. I don't know. I don't know if there's any actual problem with that.
Yeah, maybe that. I mean, that's the one thing to explore. The other thing is that now we have we introduce overloaded functions, right?
Yeah, that's a bit annoying. And for this kind of niche use case, introducing like overloaded function parameter types into the language just for that. Yeah.
Label replace for range selectors.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be very confusing. I think.
Maybe one of those cases where in the end we are like, okay, do nothing for now, but it's kind of annoying as well because it seems like something should be possible here at least.
Yeah, but there are multiple use cases, and most of the use cases you actually need to rewrite your query using a OR and know your metric names. And other cases, when you want to know the highest used metrics, for example, then we might have specific functions or API to tackle that issue.
The other argument would be if somebody is doing some by __name__, why would they do this if this label never exists? I mean, we are breaking a query that was weird from in the first place, but technically it's a breaking change.
Yeah, but the query could have been generated automatically by a third-party tool. You never know how people generate their queries. So.
Yeah, the worst thing is probably if you do something without and then suddenly, no, then it disappears because it's this special label. That doesn't matter.
And you also have to think about what happens in subqueries. Like, do you also want to keep the name from the subqueries ranges when you do a rate?
Yeah, I guess so.
And when you do a rate in a subquery, should that be available to the top-level query as well?
Should that be what?
If you do a rate in a subquery, should the original name be available to the top-level query as well?
Yeah, I guess so.
Or should we drop it at the end of the execution of the subquery?
I would just drop it as the very last thing before you display things. But yeah, I mean, we've already proven that this is technically a breaking change, which we could still use it for. We could still use a feature flag for this, right?
Yeah, and if you label replace the name at the end, then you don't want to drop it at the display level either. So you also need to take that into account.
Yeah, but you would relabel it into a different label that is not dropped, right?
You could change the name. So you would enforce.
But this is not what you would have done originally, right?
I think I have already created a name for a metric for display value because I can do label replace name is something or name is something in another query, so that in the display layer I see the two queries in the Prometheus UI with the same label set. So you can create a name, and if it is marked as dropped by a rate function inside, this would be a breaking change as well.
Okay, I mean, I think it's better to write this down because I have difficulties visualizing that.
So, can I add something? Yeah, I'm Sam. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for inviting me. You described it as like a niche of a niche. The people who I'm trying to support day to day are like the people who are operating a cluster and who are like their job is like have responsibility for keeping costs down. And so I guess what I wondered if I could add to the discussion we've already had is that although it is probably a niche of a niche, it seems like an important persona to try and support, and one that if we give people tools to maintain their costs and keep costs down, it can help the project as a whole to succeed. And with that in mind, I think one of the comments was that this could be an alternative like API endpoint, maybe. Similar to like, I think we have the TSDB stats endpoints already. I just wanted to ask more like...
Yeah, I can even imagine this to be not like a Prometheus standard, but just something that Mimir, and I guess it would be Mimir in your case, would do to just enable some more detailed reporting about its own usage and where it generates costs for the customer and so on, which is not really the primary use case for PromQL, which is more like not about the metric storage system itself, but what does that system tell me about other stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
But
see
I mean,
You see it more likely to go into Mimir, first of all, than to Prometheus. Does Prometheus, the project, concern itself very much with costs to operate?
yeah, we do. I mean, we have these TSDB stats status pages, and also they're backed by API endpoints, which give us some stats already, which labels have how many values and all that kind of thing. It's a little bit TSDB implementation specific in Prometheus at the moment, but in general, I wouldn't be against that. And don't get me wrong, like, I think it would also be nice to have it in PromQL, and you can already do a lot of these meta admin queries in PromQL. The question is only how far we want to go in adjusting the language to make that possible. And if it's like gets a little bit too dirty, then it might not be worth it. Richie, you're muted.
I am unmuted now. Thank you. Meta point. As per the agent and such, I'm one of the first people to say, okay, let's try this somewhere else, and then let's take it back into Prometheus if it works. I'm more concerned about doing this for PromQL than for most other parts of Prometheus, because I think there is substantial value in every implementation having the precise same language. So I don't have super strong opinions on the actual use case. I just have strong opinions.
But in this case, I think it wouldn't even be PromQL. It would be a complete separate, stats endpoint about the cluster storage system itself. Like, hey, cluster, tell me how many data points you have for the following metric names or the following label groupings, which seems completely reasonable. Give me stats about your TSDB, basically.
I mean, flipping this, how about we use the metrics endpoint for this kind of thing? Because we already have that one. I mean,
if we can make it work easily, nicely in PromQL without breaking things and without making things too awkward, that would be best, definitely. But I mean, we just talked through it, and there's at least many difficult points.
Okay, and I mean, it's kind of two different things that just overlap here in this particular use case. That one is reporting, right? How you can do it and how can you improve it, and then this use case of name collisions. This problem of name collision happens for very different use cases. So when Sam approached me about this, I was thinking we should solve this problem in general for this one use case, maybe, but also for all the other use cases where people run into this. So just to make clear that we are kind of having two discussions that have one overlapping point.
Maybe let's just change the functions to return range vectors. And I don't know. Would that actually cover all the other use cases you were thinking of as well? Was that the only way where you have no way of working around it?
I think so, because the standard workaround is to label replace metric names into somewhere else where it doesn't get removed. And the only reason why you cannot do this in all cases is range selectors. At least that's what I believe.
Yeah. I wonder what else. I mean, like if we had these variably typed arguments, what other parts that would break? Like all kinds of like support tooling that currently assumes that every positional argument only has one type, but maybe that's not too bad. Sam.
I mean, Go really didn't want to do it.
So
for some reason. Perhaps you should ask them.
Yeah, if label replace could return a range vector, the function I was passing that into was count over time to see exactly how many data points there were. Would the range vector that got returned by label replace be the underlying data points, or would it just be like the evaluation interval?
Yeah, I mean, it should really not change anything except for the labels on all the time series. All the raw data points should stay the same with the original timestamps and everything.
Which is another new behavior, because
Yeah.
if you apply it to a normal instance selector or whatever it's called, then you change the timestamp. Which maybe was a mistake in the first place.
Well, we only change it kind of in the output, right? Because like you can still run the timestamp function around it.
I think
Or we change it before the next.
No,
we-
the timestamp function has a very special treatment in the engine.
Okay. Yeah.
But if you do a timestamp on the result of label replace, it will be the evaluation timestamp, not the timestamp.
Yeah. After that step, definitely.
And it's like you can even do, like, if you just prepend a plus, right? A unary plus, it already changes the timestamp.
Yep.
Which is also like, it's obfuscated weird queries.
But instead of doing a label replace, do you think we could do that in the selector, that we say directly we want the name to be changed in the range selector directly without the function?
Yeah, I was also thinking of that, like some new syntax to say,
like I put in the chat,
like renaming. Oh yeah, exactly. Like those import something as foo kind of statements you have in some languages. Maybe at least in the curly braces, we're in a different syntactical context where we have more options than outside of them, like where minus or greater than would already be operators.
But now we are again in the situation where we introduce a completely new syntax.
Yeah,
just
for
one case that is only applicable in very specific circumstances. And the reason why it's applicable is really hard to understand in the first place.
Yeah. And everyone who doesn't have this use case will still need to read through the documentation for that, because it's in there and they will wonder whether they will need it.
Where if we do this feature flag thing, it's also confusing to have feature flags, but if we tell users essentially, most likely you will not be affected unless you have weird queries like this. Yeah, maybe.
Yep, difficult. Hey, Calais, how's it going?
Hi, Julius. How are you?
Still in Berlin?
Yes.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
already. So, I mean, I think we need to think through this a bit more, right? Those among us that are deep involved in this. And maybe the outcome is we just don't do anything, because Sam had already found a solution for his use case, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment it feels a little bit like a let's not do anything type situation, unless we do find like a little bit of a nicer way to do this, or a better justification even for doing it.
So I have a related justification, which is the checking for overlapping metrics is a reasonably large proportion of the time spent in many queries. And it checks at every time, right? It does one bit and checks, and then does another bit and checks, and does another bit and checks. And so if we deferred it to the end, it would go faster. But I don't know, that code is kind of nightmarish to me, at least.
I mean, then it could break stuff in between, because you can have steps in between that cannot be that might return duplicate series, and they should already return an error, even if in the end you sum over everything and only return one time series. But maybe there's a more efficient way of doing this whole duplicate checking. I don't know. I haven't looked at that part.
Okay, I think we shouldn't take more time from the whole audience here.
Yep.
And I mean, I'll try to summarize our thoughts on the issue, and if the issue gets too big, we might turn this into a document, but let's first see where this leads us. I mean, the consensus will be that Björn will summarize it in the issue. How about that?
Don't think we need a consensus for this, but if you want to, we can make one. I don't.
I'll write my to-do.
I don't think we need to
do my own list here.
Consensus, no consensus.
Consensus, it's complicated.
Okay. Then we have also, as this was relatively intense following, I offer a break, or else I can just keep going. We have 4 different topics, I think, with 4. If anyone here,
lightweight next.
lightweight, okay.
Vortex
unified proposal process.
Yeah, that sounds like a cool thing, a non-technical thing.
Yeah, should we do it?
5 minutes?
No, what was it? Wasn't the idea we just do the proposal process now and then have a break?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Everyone has.
I mean, let's make it quick. I think if we have a heavy, I'm worried. Or Bartek, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, totally. So this is something we started like last year, I believe, and the idea is that we would like to have like a maybe more official place for proposals. And we used to have like an index page that kind of like gets the link from different Google Docs, but there were some problems mentioned in this new proposal. One of them is that anyone can change or remove, or we don't own those Google Docs, so it gets kind of hectic. So the idea would be to just put those proposals into Git, into separate repository, which would be called Prometheus/proposals. And I did a demo of this repository, and I'm essentially gathering a feedback. And it was waiting for feedback, I guess 2 months already, or 3 months. I got some kind of feedback from Björn, I think, and some other people, but generally, yeah, we're waiting for final decision. Seems like there are no big I don't know, like rejections of that, so we could kind of like go for it. Maybe the one thing that I want to mention, which is kind of like still unsure, but like technical decision, should this repository have this directory proposal, or should we put the markdown files into main root, kind of like directory? That's the only kind of a question here. Go on, Julian.
It looks good to me. I just think that we should avoid putting render the markdown in the Prometheus documentation page to avoid confusing users, because that's the thing I have from Thanos. Sometimes you're looking for documentation, you think it's a documentation page, but it's a proposal that has not been implemented yet. So that's the only thing I want to avoid, is that we render that on the main website.
Correct. And there was no plan to render the proposal repository.
But other than that, I think we can move forward with your proposal.
Anyone else has any opinions, any strong objections? Maybe markdown is kind of a lot of effort. Maybe, we kind of tend to have like fun doing those Google Docs proposals. Okay, if not, if we have consensus, then I will like move the previous docs and kind of get into this project. Richie.
I have one FYI and 2 opinions. The one FYI is new. CNCF is exploring to have a blessed place where documents can live, design documents specifically for CNCF projects, because turns out we're not the only project with this long-term problem of like how were decisions made, and where there will be something where people can put documents and have them long-term persisted, as these are the things which underpin the specific of whatever project. The other 2 things, and I'm repeating myself here from I think even 2 years or 3 years ago, I'm always super worried about introducing processes, because it is very easy to introduce them. It's relatively hard to change or get rid of them. The other thing is, Markdown loses commenting functionality, and I still like it to be able to comment even if something is 2 years old. Something might pop up. That's not me blocking it. That's just me repeating, not being super thrilled.
But the idea would be that we would comment on the pull request.
Yeah, but it's,
but which means that the proposal got merged. It's already in Markdown. So what's next? And the idea is to have start a discussion or start an issue, right? Which is definitely more remote than just commenting directly in line.
yeah. So for my specific thing is what I like about Google Docs. There's a lot of downsides to Google Docs, but what I like about Google Docs is the commenting is really built in. The downside is you lose the history if you click resolve.
Josh.
So what I was thinking, I probably should have mentioned this before too. What I was thinking here is that if I were to make a proposal, and we have agreed that it's in Markdown, I would place the Markdown in a Google Docs first. Is that like the opposite of what we want to do? We want to keep everything, including the comments in the pull request itself, or it's just about where the document lives long term?
Yeah, it's ideally you could do that. You could start discussion in Google Doc, and you don't need to put that in Markdown because there are tools to convert Google Docs into Markdown. The only problem is that you might have situation where on Google Docs you might have some agreement, and then you put that into pull request, and then there are maybe different comments or comments that are repeated because someone didn't participate in discussion. But that's if the same people that will be approving the PR are kind of looking on the document, that should be fine. So you are welcome to do anything, and the long-term Markdown is the main kind of goal here.
Okay, so that also means that it's also to raise awareness about the different initiatives that are happening, right? So that you don't have to follow up with Google Docs and you can just watch this repo.
Correct.
Okay, I'm with you too.
And kind of like also lowering the barrier of proposing something, because people are maybe not. People are more stressed into how was the process of proposing things and actually proposing and playing with the idea.
I also want to come back on Richie because I own some of the design document for Prometheus, and after 1 or 2 years, I only get spam or mistakes or annoying thing in the comments. It's never really relevant, the comments that we get on design docs once they have been implemented.
Yeah, those things are rarely actionable, right? Like it's hard to catch on them. So if we have like a proper issue or discussion, might be more actionable for everybody. Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. I think the takeaway of what I was saying is Google Docs and then the pull request is a bad idea, and just stick with the pull request directly.
Okay, since we are here, anyone have opinions if the repo should have proposal directory or we put Markdown straight into root? Or that's the technical decision that doesn't matter much?
I mean, my general opinion is let's just do it one way and see how it works and be a bit flexible about adjusting. But I think the current situation where if you have never any contact with the Prometheus project and you come into it, you have no idea how are things proposed here. It looks very like some secret closed society that nobody gets into or something. And that's why having any kind of formalized process is already an improvement.
I suggest that we put that under a directory, so when you go to the repo, you see the README instead of a huge list of proposals. So you get directly access to the README and you can easily get the list of the proposals.
Fair. Okay. The counter argument is that you go to this proposal and there is like OpenShift enhancements, for example, in public, and you go there and there are like 10 different directories, and I have no idea which one is actually the main one for like proposals. So it's super confusing. But if it's only one proposal, then yeah, fine. Okay, we have 2 votes for directory, but okay, we can do that.
Okay. Call for consensus. Or should we just all LGTM it on GitHub and done?
You can, but good luck having 15 people Gitming, and I will be waiting next year again. So let's have a consensus, and I will take that as a look at me.
I lost the doc. Just a second. GitHub is gone. Oh, it's gone. Sorry, I need to reopen. I don't know where it went. Also, for anyone who joined since we started, feel more than welcome to write yourselves into the attendee list, which you can find in this document. Okay. Someone is on PTO, because I can actually read the consensus. Consensus. Let's try it and see how it works out. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Good. Okay, so we have a few other options which we can, because they're all tied in inverse order of age. Support for secret providers in Prometheus Alert Manager. Add support for created timestamps or underscore created timestamps. Doing Prometheus 3.0 and sort by label. Anyone feel strongly about any of those?
So I might have to drop after some time. So if we can discuss the 3.0, we can, or we can discuss it in the next Dev Summit. Not a rush.
When do you have to drop? Is it in 10 minutes or is it way after?
You can say 10-15 minutes.
Can we actually discuss 3.0 in 10 to 15 minutes?
No, the aim. Okay, I will just tell the gist and we will see. So the gist of this discussion is that we have been delaying a lot of discussions or decisions, saying that this is a 3.0 topic, which also happened today, for example, and we never get through them. And maybe 3.0 is long overdue. I think we have learned a lot of lessons with 2.0 design, and maybe we can improve stuff. And at the start of this Dev Summit, I also thought if we decide to do a 3.0, and if we have a list of things that we want to get done, we could also use this as something to attract new contributors, groom new maintainers, for example. Yeah. So what I wanted to get out of this discussion is, do we want to think about it, like start doing something towards it, and not what to do in 3.0? Yeah, that's the summary.
Yeah, so it's kind of a meta discussion, right?
Yeah.
Should we discuss if we should discuss? I mean, I think we're discussing this all the time. The question is just, I would more phrase it as, should we find a format that actually makes this more concrete? Like, we also have a bunch of documents, wild brainstorms about stuff, but some of it wasn't even like requiring a new major version. So maybe we should just have some form where this is more clearly enumerated, like only features that actually require a new major release, and then have some curation there to get a list together.
Speaking of curation, is anyone actually there, or does anyone feel confident to have a mental list of stuff which would be 3.0 worthy? Or do we just have like partial lists in our collective heads?
I think the latter, yeah.
Okay, let's try this one. Is anyone against starting slowly planning towards a 3.0?
I mean, I'm not against it. I'm just thinking that we have done this anyway all the time, slowly planning in this direction, right? But I think we need to. I think the itch that Ganesh wants to scratch is that we need to. We have to do it in a form that actually is a bit more targeted towards an action.
I fully agree. The reason why I asked this way is to build this layer cake of step-by-step consensus to see how far we go instead of just jumping to the far end. But let's jump to the far end. Consensus. Ganesh will create an overview of what is 3.0 worthy. Done. Not done. Done is not part of the consensus. But is this? I mean, this is what Ganesh apparently wants, and I think we would probably all agree that this is a good idea. Julian does not.
I think we can start tagging the issues that are 3.0 worthy. That would be have a tag for the next major release would be a good thing.
Yeah, we can do that. We don't need a list of documents. If there is anything, we can just create an issue and tag it. I think that's a good idea.
And then we can create a new branch for the 3.0 release and start working and breaking stuff.
Yeah,
you see Julian's grin.
That would be. It would also invite like stuff that is so overarching that you wouldn't even phrase it as an issue under normal circumstances. If we had this whatever milestone or tag, we would invite people to at least put it there, right? Like let's say the idea that functions that do not aggregate samples should return the same timestamp. For example, that would be Prometheus 3 worthy, but I would not have come up with the idea to create an issue for it. But maybe we can. That would inspire people to do that if we had a milestone or a tag for it.
Okay, let's try those two. Deliberately split into two. Consensus. We will start taking issues for 3.0. If no issues exist, we will create and tag them accordingly. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? I don't see. Okay. Next one. Consensus. We will create a branch for 3.0 work. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing?
I'm not sure.
Might be too early, right? Because like if Prometheus underneath it is still changing a lot, and I think a lot of things will need like conceptual merging. And once we have somewhat of an overview of what we even want to do, there will be incompatible concepts and things. that
what if the 3.0 item is to rewrite everything in Rust, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if the TSDB, for example, completely changes, or like first class metric types, then everything else changes as well, and so on. I think that will all require a lot of coordination.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we shouldn't. We need to take it as it comes, right? If it makes sense to cut a branch, then let's discuss it or just do it. And
yeah, I think we should cut the branch when we are confident that within like 6 weeks we can have a beta.
Alpha, maybe, yeah. But yeah, once there's somewhat of an idea of what are the most major features that should go into Prometheus 3 and how will they interact and can we make them work together, and then start with the first experiments.
Sounds good. There's a reason why I split them into two. Layer cakes. Okay, Ganesh, do you need anything else, or are you happy with this really quick?
I think I'm happy with this. I'll pair with all of you folks and we'll see where it goes.
Okay. Josh, did you add 3 potential topics below the others instead of at the top? Because okay, because this is the second time I'm confused by this section, and now I know why. If you can move them up, and then we mark them with colors and everything.
Should we have a break now? Now that Ganesh's talk
Sure.
is done? Yes.
Sure. Should we meet at 5 minutes after the hour?
Yeah.
Okay.
7 minutes break. Very generous.
See ya.
Oh no, everyone is dropping.
Hello, hello.
Oh, we're still here.
Hello.
Julian had to leave.
You can replace Julian by ChatGPT. Bartek, Julian, Ganesh. That's a lot of collective contribution power.
You can start calling them on their phones, or we just give them a few more minutes. Okay, let's get started. Out of the remaining with 4 votes, support for secret providers in Prometheus Alert Manager, or it's support for open metrics _ created timestamps, or sort by label. Anyone feel strongly about any of those? Then let's get going with the oldest one. Bartek, are you back? Or did he actually drop from the call?
Bartek says in the chat he has to drop.
Oh, okay, I didn't see this.
Yeah, so perhaps not use his
Yeah.
topic. I don't know.
Probably not. So Ben, add support for open metrics created timestamps.
Yes. What was that about? That was basically OpenMetrics provides a metric name that represents the timestamp in which a series is created, and this helps with the where did my zero data come from. And a lot of users run into this with low churn counters, error counters, that kind of thing. And we could finally, we could support this in Prometheus. We just have never actually implemented it. And I don't think there is any specific pushback in the past to implement this, but I'd like to actually say that we should support this. Does anybody have any questions about created timestamps?
I have a question. In my memory, they look like extra series.
Correct.
And I guess I would quite like not to double the number of series in my Prometheus.
Correct. So when you scrape and you use open metrics protocol buffer, you will get the you will know that anything that ends in _created can be treated as a sample, and so you don't actually have to create a new series for it. The promise is Prometheus Prometheus right now doesn't understand this, but it should, because it is, yes, it looks like it looks like another series. No, we don't have to treat it that way, because OpenMetrics explicitly tells you that this is by spec not another series, but a specific point time sample for that series.
Is Prometheus treating it as a series today?
Prometheus doesn't know anything about it today. I believe it treats it.
Is ignoring this
means
data?
Invested as an extra series, creating a lot of confusion.
Yes.
Sorry, I missed that.
Prometheus currently treats it as a normal series.
Yeah.
So most libraries turn this off by default.
Oh, there's a way to turn it off?
Yeah, you can turn it off in the client library as like, please don't expose created timestamps in my metrics. And if we actually supported it properly in Prometheus, we could flip that default back on, and it would work for all of the time series databases that we want to support, like Mimir.
Yeah, it's icky because everyone who hasn't turned it off is going to see a change in behavior.
Pretty much everybody's turned it off already.
So maybe
I
there's
think
a little bit of,
it was. I don't think it was ever turned on in Go. The only place where it was actually implemented was Python, and Python immediately turned it off by default because everybody hated it.
I thought it was in Java where we got an issue of people complaining about all these new time series.
No, it was Python.
Yeah, I think it was enabled by default in Java for a while, and then
Yeah.
it was.
There was a
implemented
huge
this
discussion
disable.
whether this would even be possible to disable, and when
Yes.
It's not possible to disable. But this, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if it is in the actual textual output format, in the textual one at least, then not creating a time series for it would be a little bit weird, I guess. Didn't we have this long?
No, because we have
Yeah.
accept encoding that tells us what to do.
I know, but yeah, still. Didn't we have this long discussion about it in after PromCon at the Dev Summit?
Possibly.
There was like this long, we talked about underscore created again for like half an hour. I don't remember what exactly was the outcome.
But we have accept encoding. We know how to deal with it. We can just deal with it like we're supposed to, which is according to the open metric spec.
Okay.
We just
So people will still see it like a time series in the text output, but they will have to understand that this will not actually be saved by Prometheus.
correct. Well, we will save it in Prometheus, but we'll save it. We'll save it in the TSDB
In a different way. Yeah, not
in a
as
different
time
way.
series. Yeah, but it looks like a time series to a human who is not familiar too much with open metrics.
Correct.
When they look at the metrics endpoint. Yeah, I can imagine that being a little bit confusing. Okay, but yeah.
But we explicitly put it in the open metric spec so that it wouldn't be confusing.
Yeah, but nobody reads the spec. I mean, the normal user. If it looks like a time series, they will just be a little bit confused. Why does I see it in my endpoint here? Like, why doesn't it show up as a time series? That's so strange.
Björn?
You're muted.
Yeah, because I had to unraise my hand and then also unmute myself. That's two things. It's too much for me. I think the whole rationale behind having it in the shape of a time series is so that like old style consumers would still store it in some way and don't have to bother about it. And I think what backfires here is that this is a lot of resources, right? For something that you might not even want and might not even use. While the other line of argument was you put it like in some comment similar to exemplar so that it's there, but only informed consumers would even store it, right? And I think in hindsight, that would have been the better approach, but that's where we are, right? So, and we have to deal with it. But that's where it's coming from, I guess. They're just two different lines of argument that both make sense to a certain extent, but they all have drawbacks.
Yep. And it's completely fixed if we just ingested the protocol buffer and ignored the text format. Because the protobuf scrape format tells you exactly what you're supposed to do with it.
Which the text format could have done as well.
The text format was done as a compromise. I didn't want it that way, but that's how it ended up.
I mean, some people wanted to have the created timestamp in a different way, but anyway.
Yeah, I wanted the created timestamp because it solves an actual end user issue, but I didn't want it formatted the way it was formatted. Anyway, Brian.
I just wanted to say I looked through the notes and we talked about underscore created 6 months ago, well, 4 months ago, whatever. But it was more about what if I want to create, if I want a series that is actually something completely different that happens to end in the word underscore created. I think that's what we were discussing last year.
That doesn't matter because that is against the open metric spec.
Right, but I'm just saying I mean I think there's another entry in the notes, June 2021, which I think is more on the subject of this, the open metrics _ created. And the consensus was we should turn it off, or have a parameter to turn it off and gather feedback.
Yep. Which we did, and the feedback was nothing because everybody wanted it off because it was not the way Prometheus was handling it, which was not following the open metric spec, was broken.
Yeah, I think I'm in favor of handling it and using it to resolve starting and stopping. Well, yeah, just starting, I guess. We need another one for finished, don't we?
No, well, that's yes, it would be nice if open metrics supported staleness markers. But we can talk about that in open metrics.
Anyway, yeah, I'm in favor of handling it as a new piece of data and not in favor of handling it as a series.
I propose the consensus item. We should follow the open metric spec for created timestamps.
Let's make it more explicit. But also, as a little bit of a thought experiment, we can, in theory, move this away from what appears to be a time series to something which then appears to be just a comment, like type or something. We went endlessly in circles on this one discussion.
We can do it as a comment. Yeah, we can just comment out all the created timestamps. The thing is, you need created timestamps for every label combination in order to handle new labels appearing.
The reason why I brought this up is the preference of Prometheus team can also inform what open metrics does.
Yep, we can add a open metrics 1.1 that also supports a new version of the created timestamps. But either way, I would like Prometheus to follow the open metric spec for created timestamps. That seems like the most simple consensus item.
Yeah.
That solves both my concerns and Brian's concerns, and hopefully everybody else.
I'm also happy to write one, but can you be a little bit more explicit? Because someone reading this will then need to read the specs instead of just knowing from the consensus what the consensus actually is.
Sure. Prometheus should support the open metric spec for created timestamps by treating created metrics as initial values or an initial creation. Initial series creation.
Okay, but so you don't actually care about the storage at all, because I was under the impression that you would also like this to be some sort of metadata and not a time series.
Well, it is part of the time series. It is a created timestamp is for this series did not exist before this time, or this series now exists, and you can treat counters as 0.
Then because I thought you agreed with Brian's point about not exploding the total amount of time series.
Yes, it's created timestamps in open metrics are an annotation to an existing series. There is always a series and its label values, and a created series and its label values, and we should just treat the created series as a sample for the series that it is associated with.
Then I didn't understand the consensus in this way.
Yeah, that would be also a concern that I remember that I thought we can use created timestamps for exactly that. And we discussed this years ago, and then Brian, not our Brian, Brian with I, said that would be not a good idea to do that. And I don't know, and Richie was now very confused as well. So I'm not so sure if this is really written in the spec or it's meant in the spec.
I would need to read the spec to be certain. The short history, I believe the super short history is very, very much required to anyone living in the Monarch world, and this is also where the ask was coming from. That Google was extremely concerned if this is not part of the spec. The rest of us didn't really deeply care. I'd say like it was nice for them, which is also why it's optional. And we did have this discussion of, well, let's just shove it into the metadata as opposed to making a new time series. And I forgot why we landed on the time series. But I know we had precisely those discussions, and I don't know what specifically. I'm pretty certain the spec just says it's optional and done. But for the intents and purposes of the consensus. Prometheus should follow the OM spec for underscore created, storing it not as a time series, but as metadata. All agreed? Anyone disagree?
I cannot say anything about this because my doubt is that this is not what the spec implies. And I had to sign this with my blood. I needed to read the spec again first. So maybe it would be easier to not refer to the spec, but just say that we want to store the created timestamp as an initial sample in a counter series. If it's not like completely, I think that was one of the arguments that the created timestamp might be completely off, right? And then you may not be able to store it, or you shouldn't store it if it's like one day before the first.
And if it doesn't meet Prometheus ingestion criteria, we can just not use it. You know, if you've already got, it's same as treating an out of order sample. If you've already got if you see a created timestamp and you've not created a new series yet, then you can use it. And then you ingest the first sample, and now you have an initial timestamp and first sample, and then everything works. And that's what it was intended to do. The whole created timestamp thing was added to the spec so that on first scrape of a new target, that we could know when that target actually started. And this is extremely important for some of my use cases where we're spinning up cron jobs or other shorter-lived test pods where they spin up and they're actually accumulating stuff very quickly. And we need to know from the 0 to the first scrape how much data was ingested.
Yep,
and that's what the created timestamp was for.
I was just talking like you just start a Prometheus server and you scrape a target that has been up for a month and it has all the counters that all have created timestamps that are a month ago. And in this, there should be a limit when you do not ingest a sample that is a month old, right? Although you could, in principle, with a like big enough out of order window, blah, blah, blah. But this is why we should probably like don't have an unconditional statement that we want to ingest the created timestamp as a sample period. Within reason.
Yes. Fabian.
I'm wondering, we could as well split it up and say, I think the general consensus is that created time series shouldn't be stored as time series. I mean, we can do this as a consensus because that's, I think, non-controversial. And what we should do instead with the created things, we can decide later if that needs more investigation.
I mean, I think it sounds good to do the layer of the cake thing that Richie likes, that we first agree that the created timestamp should not be a standalone series. That's also something. I think we had different opinions about this.
Yeah, and also that's what helps with the most pressing issue.
Okay. Let's try this. Prometheus should honor underscore created, storing it not as a time series, but as metadata. Or series metadata or whatever.
Metadata is a momentous word.
Okay, storing it not as a time series.
Yes.
Let me try again. Consensus. Prometheus should honor _created, storing it not as a time series. And let me make the not bold. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing?
I would just abstain because I don't know enough about open metrics.
Do you want your abstention to be recorded?
Nope.
Who wants to build more on top of this foundation cake? No? Ben is happy? Okay. Okay, good. One thing, Bartek might have developed a stronger opinion on the whole topic roughly a month ago, but I'll make certain that he sees this and is aware of the context. Okay, next one. Yes, we still have enough time. The secret providers, but we don't have Bartek, so let's... Where's the other one? Brian, sort by label.
Yeah, I came across it in the context that somebody was surprised by instant queries coming back in arbitrary order. As some of us know, range queries are always sorted by their labels. We have a sort function which sorts by values for instant queries. But if you wanted to sort an instant query by labels, you do not have that option. A PR has been written 7 years ago, 6 maybe, and then updated. But I did also find this document that I've linked to where a completely different syntax was proposed for post modifiers, which would include sorting. Richard.
Since roughly 2015, I have strongly believed that we need this functionality. I don't really care about where it lives, but I think we should have it.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to bring it up because it feels like people had a lot to say at various times, and it's sat there for years and not merged. And does anyone remember why?
So the short version is disagreements about generally just extending the language, and B, about how much syntactic sugar and fluff you should have in a query language, as opposed to shoving certain functionality into visualization layers or other layers. Like specific example, Grafana was mentioned back then quite often. The counter argument to this is that maybe I rely on certain orderings or something, and I would prefer to be able to extract them from Prometheus or compatible endpoints in a certain way. Like I want my JSON to be sorted, and I want this sorting to be the same as in Grafana or as in the visualization of Prometheus itself. There is a risk of people copying and pasting everything from the internet, and so they incur long-term running cost on their systems because they put too many sorting operations into the language itself. So the point was made that we could have post-processors to basically prevent people from using stuff improperly by forcing them to only do this once and only after you're basically done with everything. New context, since all of this has been ongoing for a few years. For example, Loki shows that there is absolutely a space for doing selections first and then having more syntax at the end, which basically does post-processing. Loki does more than, but like same. I see this as same, as similar. I think that's a fair summary.
By the way, there is a consensus around this from 27th of May of 2021 in our document, where we say we want to explore. Wait, where was this? Basically, that we want to explore functions around this. Oh no, sorry, 29th of April. Yeah, April 29, 2021. Yeah, and there, if you scroll down, there is a section at 3 p.m. or so where Bartek and Ganesh talked about this, about possibly having this as post modifiers versus directly in PromQL. And then we had this consensus like, hey, you know, someone could start playing around with this, but I don't know if anyone ever did actually.
If only we had unified proposals. No, but in all seriousness, Brian, is this something you would be interested in just exploring a little bit?
The post modifiers.
Yes.
Well, I think in the consensus, I'm not sure if we still were talking about the post modifiers, but just about normal PromQL functions then.
Okay.
Because it
Brian,
just says
would you
we
be
want to
interested
explore
in
new
exploring
functions.
in general?
Well, the thing is, we've already got a PR for the sort by labels function, and I mean, maybe I'm interested, but I doubt I'd get to it.
I guess the only thing missing is this part of the consensus that says that it should be behind a feature flag initially. But having a couple of these functions behind a feature flag, I don't see why not if someone wants to do it. To play around with a clear understanding that it's kind of an experiment.
Okay, well, so the request to put it behind a feature flag should go on the PR then, I guess.
I also think the post-processing idea was essentially obsolete when we came up with this trick with the add modifier for filtering for specific time, because that was supposed to be in a post-processing filter in the initial vision. And then you got also sort of sorting in the post-processing, but now nobody ever talked again about post-processing. So that's why I think it should just be in PromQL.
Good point, yeah.
So I mean, somebody probably has to shepherd this pull request then, right?
Well, I can put the comment on it asking to put it behind a feature flag.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Should we decide on a feature flag name or?
Sorry, I'm a little bit confused. Are we talking about a feature flag for the new functions?
Yeah.
Why behind a feature flag?
Yeah, like maybe a single one for a group of sorting functions if there are multiple.
But the feature flag in this case is essentially if we realize this was stupid, like hold winters back then, then we can simply remove it again without a major release. If we introduce a function not behind a feature flag and one release later realize it should look differently or it should be named differently or should not exist at all, now we have seed yes forever and not the temporary no.
Yeah, a feature flag basically just says it's marked experimental and can change.
But then I'm not sure if I missed the point of what Brian was saying originally, but then it's like, if we're going with feature flag anyways, what not do the post-processing in the feature flags directly, which is like the end goal of what we want? Is it a matter of like not doing the work because this is already made, or is it?
I don't think there's consensus that that's what we want.
Okay.
I had difficulties understanding the last sentence, Josh.
So we were talking about the post processors, right? Because Richie was saying how they're locally has shown that there's a need for that. of being able to just like, and I imagine you're talking about the pipe operator in Loki, right? Which is like you have a set of things and then you want to process instead of on top of that data that you're actually returning back, right? So I thought this was the. Go ahead, yeah.
My understanding was that we are not going for post-processors anymore, but we want for now, we want a sorting by labels function as a normal PromQL function, like in the pull request.
Okay.
But if that wasn't your understanding, maybe we need to discuss more.
No, I mean, it's less about what was my understanding and more about what I want as a product feature, if that makes any sense. And what I want, it's highly ambitious because I played no part or effort into this, but it's like I would hope that sorting functions as a whole become something different as opposed to this syntax where you're just like nesting your query inside of the function itself, which I think is what the PR is proposing if I just read it, right? So concretely, I'm talking about something like typing in the chat right now. Or something like as opposed to and please ignore the syntax because that's something to be discussed, but that's kind of like what we're getting at with post processors, if I understand this discussion correctly.
Is there a particular reason why you would want it to be a separate thing?
It just makes it hard to read, I find, especially in rules, right? Which is like you want your query to be sorted, and then you have a big query, and then you're showing it to the functions. Like, for example, label replace. I have a really hard time trying to understand.
Yeah.
Most of that, right?
That one makes sense. Yeah. With sorting, though, it should only matter in visualizations, not in rules, right?
True. But only my own visualizations. True.
I guess, I mean, like you could say the same thing about PromQL in general. It's like the nesting. Some people prefer more pipeline style language, even for the normal operations that we do. The question is, if it was a separate thing, then we need a whole new HTTP parameter or something like that, spec, and a language within that, kind of a whole new language, basically.
It's all experimental, though, which I think it's the purpose of that. So I'm like, well, if we're going by a function and we're going to mark it as a feature flag, then why not do the risky thing and go all the other way?
Yeah,
Josh,
I mean, we could have both if someone wants to kind of implement two competing proposals for doing this. I don't think we would be opposed to that if they're both hidden behind two separate feature flags. The question is, like, you would actually want this to be part of the expression input field with a pipe. So not actually a separate HTTP parameter, but like if I look at your example here, that would be, for me at least, it would be a little bit strange because like all of PromQL is nested and then suddenly you have one part that is pipeline without a clear reason why that part should be pipeline style and not nested.
If the pipeline syntax is preferred, we could pipeline a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah, we could pipeline everything except for binary operators, basically.
Prometheus 3.
Yeah, I mean, I get the sentiment definitely, like where you're coming from, and like this is the last step, and now feed it into this post-processing pipeline. But fundamentally, I think PromQL is a nested language, and it's not too different of a. I mean, I get it. It's like in your head, definitely a little bit of a different situation or step, but It's also not totally clear why then like, suddenly there needs to be this whole shift in how the syntax of the language works, if it is part of the same string field. For me, at least, I don't know. Maybe others have different opinions.
Go ahead. We have two people raising their hands. I'll go.
Yep.
I'll go after. Yeah.
The reason why, so looking back to back then, the post processor was supposed to be a safeguard of sorts, that no one ever does this within normal PromQL queries, and a pipe would make this very, very obvious that you're basically done with PromQL. That being said, I'm not super like I don't have strong opinions either way. I just want to have the functionality. My one strong opinion is, if we do this, can we just do this all behind one single feature flag and just allow people to do whatever and break stuff? Then Josh, would you actually be interested in making that happen for this specific syntax?
I mean, I would love to, but I have no time to be able to compromise to that, at least in the next 6 months, right? This seems highly interesting. Yeah. You're next, Brian.
Yeah, so you sort of said why not, and the why not is that implementing one function or two functions as in this PR is pretty small and constrained, and a completely new parser is a vast exercise. So that's why not.
Okay.
Maybe Promlens can have a pipe mode where it just rearranges everything as a pipe.
I mean, Grafana kind of has it now, right? in the visual builder.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's really just syntactic sugar and not a really new structural thing, why not, right? This could be just represented as a query editor or something, some of kinds. And what I don't know, Richie said that the initial idea of post-processor was it would actually be a really separate thing, which would have a separate field in the HTTP query API, right? It wouldn't be part of the PromQL string.
We had this discussion. I strongly believe we do not want to have a separate endpoint. We have one endpoint for everything. But we had the discussion, not everyone agreed.
Not endpoint, but field in the same endpoint.
Same endpoint, but with a field like query equals blah, time equals blah, start equals X, stop equals Y, post-processor equals sort by something. I think that was the idea originally, but I think this idea is dead, right? And that's also not what Josh wants, right? If I understand this correctly.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
I think we never actually went to the depth of saying it must be a different field. I think we had consensus on only one API point and didn't specify anything more. But
it was not supposed to be part of PromQL. Well, this is, if you take the inspiration from like LogQL for Loki, it's part of LogQL to have pipe symbol and do something in that pipeline, right? And so I mean, it's a bit academic to discuss, is it part of PromQL or not, but factually it would be part of PromQL if you can just write it in that way in the query, the expression text field. But anyway, as Ryan said, this is a relatively simple thing to just implement as an additional function, which you could do right now. Just shepherd this pull request still behind the PHP flag, just not to like have a function forever that might not be the right one. And then I think this pipeline syntax would be, it's an example for something that could be done with the pipeline syntax, but it would be kind of a different effort that would also affect other stuff that we already have.
Yeah, I think that's what I was fishing for at the end, right? It's like, there's a reason where we're going with the function because it's basically what's already there, right? And if that's the case, then fair enough, you don't have all infinite time. Let's go for that. And the other thing is that the pipe and the add are just like illustrative purposes of what I'm trying to go. But those Like you can effectively ignore those symbols. It's not what it should be, or it's not what I want. It's kind of like the style, but not the symbols themselves. That's it.
There's more. Julian made the point last time that he doesn't want to have this in a function because subqueries might become an issue. But we can, in theory, just ignore them in subqueries if we believe they cause issues.
I don't quite understand that.
I literally just read the thing from the last discussion. Julian want to keep it out of PromQL. Subqueries a problem, and no matter if this is post-processing as part of PromQL or a function in PromQL, we can just ignore whatever is doing sorting or whatever when in the context of a subquery, and done. But I wanted to refresh memories because I also had forgotten that we talked about this 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago.
Okay, so what's the outcome?
I think the outcome is Brian asked them to make a feature flag, and we merge it and we see what, if anything, breaks. And if someone feels strongly on pipe-based syntax, they can toss it behind the same feature flag.
Yeah, I think those two things is like, I think Brian shepherd this PR to get it merged, and then the other one is put everything to make the feature flag generic enough so that we can put other things that relate to that on the same flag, right?
Consensus, we will experiment behind a feature flag. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Or we can do consensus. We'll follow the consensus from 2 years ago.
Sorry, don't we have to sort of say which of the ones? Like, I mean, essentially we discussed both of them, and
it's deliberately not nailed down unless someone wants to have a consensus about disallowing pipes. So this is very, very deliberate. It sometimes leaves things too fuzzy to directly derive what we need and what we do. But this is very much on purpose because historically we sometimes or regularly went into situations where a specific phrasing and or wording prevented this one thing under very specific interpretations of the written words. And to avoid this, we are extremely deliberate or I have been historically extremely deliberate is probably the better phrasing in making wide open statements which allow positive interpretation and experimentation. And not being too descriptive, like, for example, I'm not writing down you are the one who's going to shepherd this. We have 10 minutes left, which means we can either do a quick one or we can get
I mean, we have so many people that dropped already. I'm not sure if it makes sense.
See you in a month at the latest.
All right. Okay.
Cool.
Bye.
See ya.